I think let's begin. So, hello everybody. Welcome to SGIS Film Academy Talks 2021. So, I'm Xiao Ting and I'll be moderating this session for today. I'm actually an alumni of the Youth Jury and Critics program last year. And so like this year, I'm coming back here as a moderator for all of you. And personally, I'm also a writer. So I'm very excited and glad and really looking forward to hearing from all of you. So to begin, I think it would be nice to hear from everyone, like maybe a short introduction and also share a little bit more about what got you into Asian cinema in the first place. Yeah, so anybody would like to begin?
Maggie?
Me? I was gonna,
Ladies first.
I was gonna nominate the hologram, Adrian.
Is this where you're gonna fight? Who goes first?
Okay, I'll just start to save time. So my name is Maggie Lee, and I've been a film critic for over 10 years. First for the Hollywood Reporter, and then for Variety, that I'm still working for. And talking about Asian cinema, because I grew up already having the chance to watch a lot of Japanese or Chinese language or something, as well as Korean films. I wanted to start explaining my journey a bit about Southeast Asian cinema, because I actually really discovered Southeast Asian cinema when I was hired to build up an Asian section for the short film festival in Japan. And that was when I met a lot of friends from all over Southeast Asia who were just so warm and helpful, like, people like Amir Mohammed from Malaysia and Tan Choi Mui, and people from Substation and Mini Kino, run by Tintin Woolley at the time, in Indonesia. And through them, I just kind of was able to see the short films of so many people, directors who have now become really famous and made like feature films and shown their films in Cannes and other major festivals. And I still remember being invited to the class in Japan to show, and I showed the short film of Edwin. It was called A Very Slow Breakfast, and I still remember everyone's just like quiet and saying, "What is this?" But I think it's for me, it's like discovering not just films and a film talent, but like actually the personality of Southeast Asia, which is very, very different from, say, East Asia or definitely Europe, and the warmth of it in particular that really drew me into Southeast Asian cinemas, because the people are so wonderful, and they also have a lot to explore, a lot of problems to solve, and I think that's why it's so wonderful. And then I also want to thank the Substation, because I was invited to join a group of Southeast Asian programmers to show short films from their countries called S Express. And kind of that's how I kind of sort of got into a network. Yeah. But yeah.
That's lovely.
Okay.
Well, Panos, are you going next?
Sure. Okay. Okay. My name is Panos Kotsathanasis. I'm from Greece. I'm a film critic specializing on Asian cinema. I have been writing about Asian cinema for almost 15 years now, and I'm also the owner and editor-in-chief of Asian Movie Pulse. Regarding Asian cinema, actually, I had no chance on dealing with anything else, because for me it happened when I was a child, when I was in elementary school, and all the other children my age were watching these Greek comedies. But there was a woman in the local video store who told my mother, because I used to go with my mother, then I was too small. She told her, do not let the kid watch those stupid Greek comedies. Let him watch some Jackie Chan. This is the good stuff. So it started around then, and I never managed to get over it. I'm still hooked to Asian cinema since then. And I will stop here.
That's fascinating. I mean, like we have someone with like, a more like Southeast Asian focus, and then with Panos, it's like a childhood beginning. How about Davide and Adrian? Who are you? How and why do you get into Asian cinema?
Well, I'm Davide, Davide Cazzaro. Originally, I'm from Italy, but yes, a number of coincidences brought me to kind of follow and focus and write and try to kind of then later on publish about cinema in general and cinema in Asia in particular. Talking about youth jury, we were mentioning before with Xiaoting and academies, etc. I myself, in a sense, before I studied the cinema at university, I had the pleasure of joining a youth jury myself a couple of times at the Venice Film Festival back in Italy, and that was a kind of jury academy kind of program, and I really welcome, and I'm always very excited about those kind of programs. If you have a chance to attend and to join something like that, please, by all chance, do. By all means, do. Yeah, a number of coincidences at the Venice Film Festival led me to watch a number of Asian films, and from there, in a sense, I was hooked, so to speak, as Panos said. And a number of kind of opportunities led me. Luckily, I was very fortunate that I could watch more and more Asian films from Europe at the beginning, and then quite a lot of Korea, South Korean contemporary movies, and kind of doing some research about Korean cinema, and eventually moving to Korea for a number of years and working, then shifting in a sense from criticism and writing per se into more editing, editorship and curatorship and publishing. So in later years, that kind of the two passions for publishing and for Asian cinema, I try to combine them in a magazine, in a print magazine called Nang, and yeah, and that's what I've been very occupied with for the past few years.
How about you, Adrian?
Okay, I'm Adrian. I'm from Indonesia. For the last 10 or 12 years, I've been writing for Senar Poetica, and also for some other publications, whether it's national or international publications. My first contact with Asian cinema is actually with the Mandarin films, with Chinese films. I was born in a very small town in East Java, and there was only this one movie theater, very run-down movie theater, and it's partially open air, that kind of movie theater, and there are no seat numbers and whatever. And they always screen these Mandarin films, which I only remember one film, The Legend of White Snake, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not even sure if it's listed in IMDb or not. But that kind of experience really what what gets me going with watching Indonesian films, because Asian cinema held this particular appeal that Western or other continents films that don't have, for me personally, because they look familiar and sometimes they look cheesy, but my kind of cheesy, So that's what makes me because of that, I decided to get more, to understand more about Indonesian cinema, especially during my college days in Yogyakarta, which at the time in 2006, they organized, the local filmmakers organized this festival called Jogja Netpack Asian Film Festival, which is now considered one of the important festivals in Indonesia. At that festival was actually like the first time I knew about Asian cinema in general, and mostly Southeast Asian cinema in general. At the same time, I also work for this alternative screening space called Kinoki in Yogyakarta. And again, just to make sure it's not a proper screening space, because we basically screen half pirated movies and half official movies. So I don't want to get into that, but at the time it was actually very, it was a very transformative experience for me, because I get to know all these films made in the grassroots Indonesian cinema, and I get to know all this Southeast Asian cinema through the festival. So yeah, that's how that's how my love affair with Asian cinema began.
Thank you all for sharing. It's so fascinating to me that all of you come from such different entry points, but you all just simply are hooked, right? Like what Panos and Davide said, to cinema. Like we have Maggie, who writes for like Variety, which is a capital P kind of publication, and like Davide, who's like a zine, like printed zine, and even like Adrian, and also Panos, who is currently facing some connectivity issues and will be back with us shortly.
Where's Panos?
Yeah, Panos will come back when Panos comes back. But meanwhile, yeah, because like this whole topic that we are talking about, it's about developing the critical word in an age of opinion, right? And with that frame, I'm wondering, with all about Asian cinema that you have all shared from all your different entry points, what are the realities of writing about Asian cinema in where you are?
Mhm.
You know,
Maggie.
Me again.
why is everyone pointing to Maggie?
Okay, well, the thing is, because I writing for a publication like Variety, I'm in a bit of an overprivileged position where I don't really, it's quite easy for me to get to see films before they're released, and there's a particular format I can write and I still get paid, and and it's in English, so it gets read a lot more and it gets quoted a lot more. So in terms of realities and writing, what I actually want to talk about more, maybe, or to bring out more, because I actually want to interview Adrian after this, is that I think what I noticed about Asian cinema is that it's there are so many great writers of Asian cinema, very knowledgeable, scholarly people, or people who are young and know a lot about what's going on, but they're probably not getting read because they're writing in their own language. And yet at the same time, I think it's really important that they write in their own language, because the problem with some people who write in English is that they're not necessarily the experts, so to speak, but then they get more attention simply because they're writing in the language that everybody can read. So I think one of the most important things is to encourage more people to write about their own cinema in their own language, but then to see if there's chances for either their own governments or organizations or other international organizations could support them by funding translations. And something like Nang, I think it's just really great, because it sort of brings together so many different cinemas and talking about so many, and that he's able to interview people, and because I actually kind of got slightly involved with the first edition when I kind of helped her with some interviews with the script writers, but it was in their own language, and then it was translated or it was written by someone who was bilingual. And I think that's also really important, is to also encourage this whole idea of people talking about gatekeepers, to encourage people in their own country to be able to take more initiative but not just to take the initiative to write, but to actually help them get more exposure internationally. Yeah, and I think, Adrian, I really want to hear what you have to say, because you were talking at a previous conversation about how you write for free as activism, and I think cinema activism in Southeast Asia is probably something we all want to know.
Yeah, I mean, before Adrian answered your very provocative question, so at Panos, we're just talking about how it's important for people in Asia to write about Asian cinema in their own languages, and maybe to have a support about translation. Yeah.
Okay.
Adrian, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I do believe the material realities of the society actually influence what kind of products and what kind of writing it produces. And in the case of Indonesia, it's quite peculiar. I mean, in my perspective, I mean, in 2006, 2007, when I first got involved in film in general, and then the situation is actually very similar in 2010 when I first writing. There were no such thing called industry at the time. I mean, when we talk about film industry, it's usually just a bunch of Jakarta-based or the capital-based production house that produces high budget or mainstream cinema. I mean, but there were no such thing as film industry, and in consequence, there were no such thing as a stable enough media industry to support film criticism. So at the time when you mentioned the word film criticism, you were basically referring to a bunch of grassroots communities, usually journalists or usually academics, even sometimes film artists that writes. And Cinema Politica, and including me, was in that kind of niche. We were in that group actually, but we were different actually, because we were not artists, we were not journalists, and we were not academics. We were still in college at the time. So we were basically just cinephiles, just some volunteers for local film festivals and screening space that happens to write. And at the time, we realized there was this big gap of knowledge. I mean, in 2010, Indonesia, the internet culture is actually, you know, it was the dawn of this, torrent communities. You know that kind of stuff, right? The torrent communities, all this pirated. And Panos laughing. I think Panos realized this. That kind of culture was actually like the supporting ecosystem for the cinephilia in Indonesia at the time. And it was actually quite strange because many of my peers and many of my social circles, they actually know more about French New Wave, for example, or Italian neorealism more than the local film history, or even the recent local films. So we need to write at the time. We need to write about the local films, about the national cinema, at least just to get the awareness first. And then after like 5 years, Cinema Politika was active, and we train, we workshop more writers. We begin to, set on higher aims. Okay, let's put all these national films and these local films within a more critical perspective. So now they could be compared with all these films that people watch from the torrent, from all these things. So let's put it within a more critical framework. So we know how Indonesian cinema is situated within the region, within Southeast Asia, within the international world, or at least within the recent history. So, and just like Maggie mentioned, yeah, it was all done free because basically we don't have any financial backbone to support this kind of activity. So we basically just, pull up our monies, pull up our resources. We contacted the friends that who could design websites. We connect friends who could edit stuffs, who would teach us how to edit writings, who would teach us how to do basic journalistic methods and things like that. So that's what has been happening in the last 10 years from my perspective. Although lately we've been offered from some millennial media corporations, just to make paid content, but we've been negotiating around that. But yeah, if you're talking about the film criticism in Indonesia, it's basically that 90% film activism.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, because from what I'm hearing from Maggie and Adrian, right, like film criticism is not just criticism, but it's also activism, just simply to let people know that films exist, like beyond the more like so-called Eurocentric films. And I'm wondering, also thinking about language, thinking about like film activism, writing about the films you like or don't like what is like Davide's and Panos's view on this? Because Davide comes from a more editorial vision, while Panos comes from a more like just simply, you say you're addicted to like Asian films, right? So like addiction and editorial side, like how do they interweave?
Okay, well, before I answer your question, I would like to comment a bit on what Adrian said, because for me, it's also very strange, because when you ask an Asian filmmaker about people like other directors that influenced them, they never talk about other Asian directors. They usually say Truffaut or, German or Italian neorealism. So this gap that Adrian was mentioning, it goes beyond the writers. It also affects the filmmaker. Even the filmmakers don't know their own country's film history. I don't know. I guess it kind of falls to us writers to maybe, I don't know, inform and educate, but also it needs a lot of research. Okay. And regarding, now to get back to your question, for me, good reviews and bad reviews, for me, it's the same thing. I mean, I don't change way right if you is good or
Is the internet trying to speak as well? Oh no, Panos.
Panos, we are losing you.
We are losing you, Panos.
Point.
Oh. Panos, can you hear us? Or
positive
I think Panos is in a time capsule right now.
negative. And
Oh dear, Panos. Okay, let's give it like 2 seconds.
Will it help if we mute ourselves?
You know
No.
what? I think Panos is gone.
Oh, we'll
I
be
mean, the
back.
last thing he said, he'll be back. But well, he was talking about good and bad reviews being the same thing. But Davide, as an editor, is that true?
You pick up Panos torch.
No, I really, of course. One important thing I think, obviously, I'm just trying to interpret the last part of what Panos said. I like the enthusiasm in a sense and the commitment in the writing and in kind of approaching film writing in a way that tries to kind of transport and transmit the film to the viewer. Let's see. So maybe I'll pass the word back to Panos. Panos, please.
Yeah, I'm from my phone now. I'm on data, mobile data, so no problem anymore. But the Wi-Fi here has an issue today. I'm very sorry for disrupting the whole. Really sorry.
Please, Panos. Yeah, you got cut off when you were talking about good reviews and bad reviews. Maybe you want to take it from there.
Yeah. Okay. What I wanted to say is that for me, good reviews and bad reviews is exactly the same thing in the way I write, and I feel that they are both equally important. Even sometimes writing negative reviews is more important because one of the purpose of the critic, of the film writer in general, is also to point out some errors to the actual filmmaker. I think this is one of the purposes of criticism, to help filmmakers get better. So yeah, I try to retain the same quality and the same kind of writing, either my reviews are good or bad. I don't change anything on that regard. That is what I wanted to say before I was cut off.
One thing, perhaps in answering your kind of circling back to your question, Axel, I think about the state of writing or the availability of kind of discussion on and the breadth and circulation of different kind of writing and discussions about Asian cinema. That is precisely one of the reasons why I started Nang some years ago. That exactly I was a bit frustrated by the lack of a more sustained focus and a more kind of more long-standing and sustained indeed engagement basically with anything related in a sense to cinema in Asia, because with that we take a very, of course, expensive if you wish, definition and kind of geographical almost blurred borders about the whole area in a sense. So that was precisely what one of the main reasons why I decided to start the publication, and they try to kind of create what is very important for me is a platform in a sense. If and going back also to the commitment of the writers and the editors, if a publication manages to become a platform for indeed a kind of a catalyst in a sense for further discussion, for raising awareness, for inspiring readers, filmmakers to kind of point of connection, that's what really kind of interests me in a sense. So that was part of the reason why I decided to start the publication. And in connection to potential more broadly film writing, obviously here we are largely engaging with the kind of the main genre, so to speak, if you want to call it, of film writing, which is film reviews. But a bit subversively, I enjoyed at the beginning of Nang deciding that the magazine will never contain a single review. So taking away, in a sense, nothing against the view, was part of the nature of the publication. So what happens to a film publication if you take away from the film publication what usually makes a film publication? So it was a bit of also a challenge for myself and for the editors and collaborators, basically, and try to take as many different directions as possible. So that was part of the, and with that, see what happens to the writing, what happens to the kind of pieces you produce, etc. Basically.
I mean, picking up on what you said about the different directions they can go to and how like Nang as a platform did not want to publish reviews, right? And I'm wondering, like, this is an open question to all four of you, like, how might we think about platform as a thing and how do we complicate that? You know, when we think of platform, we think of websites or like books or things like that, but what other kinds of platforms might be possible?
I'm not going to be the one to the first one to say. I want to hear other people.
Maggie.
No way. What about Adrian?
Yeah, I nominate the hologram.
That's actually one of the questions that we in Cineputica, have been trying to ponder and reflect, at least in the first 5 years, because at the time when we established Cineputica in 2010, we chose website. Basically, it was a very pragmatic choice. It was cheap, and it was easily accessible. But in 2012 or 2013, we began, organizing this series of writing workshops, especially to areas and cities with very little internet connection. They have cinema culture, they have film culture, they watch films with lots of other means, but they have very little internet connection. And some of the writers that we workshop, they actually began to ponder also. I mean, how do we, get these words out to the public? One of the, I don't know if it's still going or not, but one of the earliest experimentation with one of my groups in Sulawesi, it's one of these with Malaysia, that island. They actually create this community radio just to talk about the films that are available in the local film rentals. so it was practically like a precursor to podcast, but in very with a community radio. I don't know how well it worked, but because of that, I began to promote how these ideas to my other students in some other cities. I mean, let's create zine, for example, or in some villages in Indonesia. There's this one very peculiar method of information. So usually in the center of the village, they have this information board, and you just post all this, this rain cycles, all this information about phone numbers, and let's use that for film reviews, for example. And I know some people did it, but lately we've been trying to to invite and ask and to involve more and more younger people, to let's create something, or let's create something other than writing. Because I mean, I even admitted to my students, I'm a dinosaur. All the Cineputica founders, we are all dinosaurs. We only know one way to express by writing. And you guys, the younger generation, perhaps you know other languages now at the moment, the digital language, the podcast, using Instagram captions or whatever. I mean, this question is still being asked at the moment. But I mean, from my experience, that's how I grapple with that question. I don't know about the others.
I mean, now there's TikTok, right? 15 seconds of
TikTok.
just very like funny, like in a very particular kind of humor. I think that is also a way of responding to films, or even just Instagram stories, which are all these social media things which can get viral. And you no longer need to sit at your desk for like 8 hours trying to write something. You can just film something immediately and have it go up. Yeah, Panos, do you want to say something just now?
Yeah. I think that we live in an era where the younger generations, they don't read. that much in general, particularly on the internet. I don't think they stay like to read like, I don't know, a text for 10 minutes. I don't see that happening. So what I see the future of this thing about writing or commenting, discussing, let's say, about movies, I think podcasts and maybe YouTube videos are maybe the future, considering how this thing is working. And usually, you know, podcast, someone can listen to it while he or she is doing something else, which also helps. Because like stopping everything they do in order to talk about movies, particularly, or in order to read about movies, particularly in an age where they can watch a movie so easily, they don't need to read about it. They can just, you know, no torrents, just from Netflix or, you know. So for me, I think that's the future alternative way, let's say, the podcasts and video. TikTok, as you mentioned. I think that's the future.
Future.
The future. The present, but also probably the future.
I'm slightly biased, but I need to bear maybe the flag of paper too. I think. I think the coexistence would be very interesting. They're not necessarily, of course, oppositional, and I very much enjoy a movie podcast, of course, the odd TikTok video or YouTube. But maybe I'm a dinosaur even more than Adrian. But the going back to paper and the break and the respite from digital screens and from engagement either with screens or devices. We are all suffering, of course, from Zoom fatigue, etc. So the return, in a sense, to the page and to the paper, and then the reading experience or the looking at images on paper, of course, is very, very different from the one that is done on screen, both kind of mentally, but also psychologically, etc. So definitely there will be, I have no doubt about it, continuous space and an important area for print publications. But obviously I am quite biased. However, at the same time, as some of you may know, NANG is coming to an end because an important part, the nature of the publication is a limited run. So I am biased up to a point because the publication is going to conclude.
Oh, really?
Yes, it's 10 issues. Yes, 10 issues in total. Yeah. No, it doesn't want to be sad. It wants to be kind of hopefully in the good, in the best case scenario will become a kind of celebration. So ends, but anyway, we will ends doesn't mean the end, you may say. But anyway,
I think I really, how do I say it? Like, you know, I think I noticed that since the pandemic have started, you know, I'm reading so much more than I used to. And when I was a student or when I was younger and I lived in countries where I was commuting for longer periods, I read a lot while I was on the train and on my commute. And then since then, I've been reading a lot less because of all the work I have to do on, you know, digitally or going to the cinema. And I found that, you know, you also need to be in a certain zone to read. And it's just one of the greatest pleasures I've rediscovered. And I think I've been told, I mean, everywhere you read, you know, like the book sales have been just exploding during the pandemic, because after all these Zoom talks and everything, people wanted to just have that, to enter a different zone where you can think and read, and just that it's kind of a different pace. So I think there's and if something is like nicely, like, you know, I think Xiaoting also mentioned zines. I think zines quite a great idea because it allows a lot more individuality and a lot more freedom in how you organize the material and what you want to talk about. And I think, well, like, you know, as Panos and the others are saying, how people have shorter attention spans now, but at the same time, I think it's also important to have longer, like, you know, to give people time to really think about what they want to say, what they want to research into, and write something long. Because, for example, now a lot of the critics, the film reviews that you see online, they're under so much pressure to just beat the competition to write it. And, you know, the sort of like, you know, when I'm in Cannes, you know, every year the number of hours I get to write is shorter. You know, it was like, you know, I'd get like 3 hours or 2.5 hours, and every year I'm like bargaining with my editors and say, oh, can I have 15 more minutes to hand it in? And it's just really painful. So it's just, I think something like Nang or other publications that allows, whether it's online or not, allows people that space. I mean, people always talking about slow cinema, but it's like, what about slow criticism? You know, but at the same time, I think the whole idea of the podcast or viewer parties and all that, I'm all for it too, but it does take a bit of adjustment, because I was interviewed for a podcast at Movie, and it's like for the first time, and I felt like I completely lost control, because I couldn't shape what I was talking about the way I could shape a piece of writing and have a structure. And I was very much, in a way, like, what's the word, directed by the way they were asking questions, and I hadn't learned how to in some way control it so that I could say what I wanted to say. So I was always just answering questions, and it wasn't actually going the direction I wanted in a way, but it was a really educational experience because then I think it makes your brain think in a different way and think about what you want to say. And that's I think that's something that I think also in the future film workshops for critics or anyone it would be good to kind of offer this sort of training as well, for them to like rethink how they express their ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounds like when you are creating a podcast, you are more instinctive in your responses. You can't just like re-say things. You have to say whatever. And I want to pick up on what Davide mentioned about all these things meant like coexisting. You know what I mean? Like something that you have all expressed is a sense of being oversaturated, right? There's so many things going on, so much media to consume even. And like all these like, it almost feels like slow criticism, as you said, is almost an antidote perhaps to all this fatigue that we are feeling. Yeah, and
just to say one thing, because just not to be misunderstood, I didn't mean that there is no space for written reviews, because I'll probably keep on writing reviews forever. I just meant as an alternative. I think that video is the one that's more popular now. That's what I meant. I'm still reading actual books, you know. I don't have Kindle or anything, so I'm still for printed media very much, and writing in general. But as you mentioned, this, as Maggie also mentioned, I think that if we are going to move forward, and we need, as writers, we need to acquire the skill how to present ourselves in front of a camera and talk in podcasts. So I think it's a necessary skill almost. Yes.
I mean, it's a new training that you need to do, not just writing, but maybe articulation and like all these things, right? Yeah, because there's also something.
And how to dress, you know.
How to dress, just the top half, right? Yeah, because there is something quite beautiful in the instinctive, like fast responses, because then you are not as filtered, and perhaps you can be more honest, if I may suggest, you know, instead of trying to frame it all the time. And like something about the portability of all these like minute nuggets, like be it zines or like 15-second videos, is that you can share it with your friends and you can talk about it very quickly without having to sit down for 10 hours to digest it. So all these things have space, I think.
I think there's a question I wanted to raise to all of you while we're talking about this. I think we talked a lot about like the production, the creative production side of what we do, but then what about the distribution channels? Because that's changing a lot. And this is a question I'm very interested to hear from all of you. You know, how do you define your target audiences, and how do you find the ways of getting what you've written to them? I mean, Adrian kind of explained some of it, and it's absolutely fantastic and fascinating. But I'm just interested to see if you guys want to talk a bit more about that.
Davide.
Well,
why am I acting as this?
No, that's an important, of course, point. The in my case, with a print-only publication, of course, it's an extra challenge in a sense. Actually, both I think are challenging. Of course, writing on the web, obviously, it's difficult to gain visibility and to gain and getting, in a sense, the right audience. What is really important for me is the connection between the certain piece of writing and a reader that may be interested in the first place in that piece of writing. So that is challenging very much on the web because of the sheer, of course, unlimited options and all the distractions you actually get when you are engaging with, of course, with the online world. For a print publication, it's a completely different game and incredibly challenging too, of course, because it's a matter of literally transporting things from point A to point B to C, D, and then at D there's a problem, back to C, and then A again. So it's been very challenging, but for a publication and a periodical like Nang has been a combination of shops and online orders and events, either festivals or book fairs, etc. Trying very much indeed. One aspect I really enjoy a lot. Some other publishers really don't like it. I like book fairs very much because it's the chance to encounter potential readers or to meet actual readers that encountered the publication before. So that browsing experience and that kind of tactile kind of handling of the magazine is something. Last year was, of course, a very difficult year for everyone, including also in Europe. And I traveled many hours to go to a small book fair in Germany, and I really couldn't understand why. I was going through the pain, and there's also a bit, of course, the danger, given that the situation was quite critical of attending the fair. But then when the fair started and I saw some of the visitors to pick up the magazine, I understood why at the back of my mind I had to go there. So that was quite an important moment for me. So distribution and indeed the touching, so to speak, of a text and a reader, and trying, it's really kind of something that platforms should try to focus as much as possible, in a sense, to further indeed. Without a reader, any text is meaningless, in a sense. So how to make that bridge and establish the connection is something quite fascinating. And events like this one, hopefully, of course, also help, of course, fostering the awareness and building some of those bridges, basically.
Okay. Well, I guess because I follow the statistics of Asian MoviePass almost daily. So what I know about our audience is, okay, US readers tend to read more about martial arts, horror, and Korean mainstream films. And then our main audience comes from countries like India, Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, who really enjoy reading about the country's films from foreigners. I don't know. So yes, so that's my target. Mostly my target audience is Asians who speak English.
That's true.
I mean, English is always a thing, right? Language, that what Maggie mentioned from the very start of this session. And I think that brings us very nicely into a question from the audience, because we have like about 15-20 minutes more, and I think I would like to take questions from the audience. Yeah, so this question is from Mandy from Indonesia. So I'll just read like Mandy's question. Like, when I read about I know.
Your fan.
Well, your friend. So Mandy from Indonesia, Adrian's friend, have a question. When I read about a director, sometimes it says that they have a strong style or they are pushing the boundaries of cinema language. How do you explain what those terms mean to a child?
To a child?
Yeah, to a child. What is a strong style? What is a pushing the boundaries of cinema language to a kid?
Good luck.
Good luck.
That's interesting. Actually, I don't know if Wendy is present or not, but her friends actually. In 2016, I was invited to mentor in this workshop for, I think it's like 8 to 10 years old. it's basically film introduction. So in that workshop, Edwin also mentored in that workshop. Also, Edwin was introducing how to use film celluloid for children, and I was tasked to introduce how to do film criticism for children. So it was actually a very strange workshop, but that was actually very interesting because at the time I barely know how a child perceives audiovisual language. I mean, at this point, I could not answer that question, but because we have another question that also needs to be answered, on how a child actually perceive audiovisual language. Because at the time, I was trying to screen some narrative short films for children, and they actually don't process the narrative link between the scenes. They actually process it more. They actually see films more like a bunch of images. I mean, more like a free association type of thingy. So I mean, for us, we usually look for stories, right? Just to make sense of the images and the sounds that we see. But they don't actually. I think because I'm not exactly a child psychologist, but they don't respond to the narrative aspect of the story. So at the time, it was actually interesting. We don't know how they perceive. We don't know how do they perceive the audiovisual language. And for me, this also the problem and the challenges for film criticism in general. We don't know how the general public or all these diverse people perceive audiovisual language. I mean, if we look at the most reviews or film writings in the net, especially published by the major publications, they usually focus on one or two things, right? Like the narrative side of things, or like the aesthetic, like how the camera frames certain events and things like that. But that's just one way of looking things. I've been screening some, for example, documentary films for villagers for farmers, mostly farmers. They have different visual reference to city people, just to make it short, to city people. And they also experience time in a very different way to the city people. And they actually could enjoy slow cinema. And because of the way they live. And because of that, I was fascinated. So we never knew how they process audiovisual expressions. And because of this so-called experimentation, I just knew, okay, they are actually, they should be the target for slow cinema, not all those festival goers. So I think the same question applies to how we could explain films to a child.
That's really interesting, because actually when I first started working in Japan, there was a famous film critic and festival programmer called Teruoka Sozo, and I was his assistant. And he actually now runs the Osaka Asian Film Festival. And I remember that I used to follow, he used to take me with him, like he never went to those big famous European festivals like Cannes or Berlin, because he's a chain smoker, so he can't actually take long distance flights. So he doesn't really go to festivals. So what we do is we would just go to all these Southeast Asian countries, and then or even like go to Korea, wherever, or Taiwan, and we would just, as soon as we check into hotel, I would go online and see what's available in the normal cinemas, and then we just go. And at first I was like, geez, I don't understand what, because most of these countries, they don't have subtitles, right? So I just don't understand why, we'd be going to Cinema Malaya or Cinema Malaya has something, but we'd go to Metro Manila Festival, and then nothing's got subtitles in those days, or we'd go see Korean film, and then he was just telling me, he said, well, just watch it. You don't really need to know what's happening all the time. You don't need to hear every word they're saying, and then after all, you get used to it, and you sort of make them. You just put the two and two together yourself. You put the puzzle together yourself. And also, I spent so long living in Japan, where they just, I'd spend all day watching classics, old movies in cinemas, and there's never a single subtitle. But then after a while, you adjust, and then you really appreciate the visual storytelling a lot more. then focusing on those basics like storyline, dialogue, and the performances also comes out differently, because then you're watching their performances to understand what's going on without hearing their words. So they're using their bodies and their faces to act, to move the story along.
Yeah, from what the both of you just shared, it almost feels like as a writer, you need to think about the audience a lot more than the film. Because I mean, like, it's almost like a writer's job to contextualize, to build a bridge, right? Like what was previously mentioned, a bridge. So, Panos and Davide, do you have anything to say? I'll move on to the next question.
But I think Adrian answered. I mean, I wouldn't be able to. It's a very fascinating question, actually.
Yeah.
It's a very fascinating question. I wouldn't be able to provide anything interesting to say.
I mean, the next question, right, is also a lot about. The next question is from Eternality, Tan, and from Singapore. And they say, thank you for organizing this panel session. I have been writing reviews for nearly 15 years and have always been struggling with this. If you already know the filmmaker personally, or you have met or done a Q&A with the person before in a festival or an event, how do you even begin to write a review of their film? And what if the film is average or below expectations? How can you be honest yet also not offending the filmmaker?
Trash it.
Take no prisoners, you know. Well, I have to say that this is one of the most difficult things that can happen to you, because, okay, we all go to festivals and we get friendly with the filmmakers and producers, and then suddenly comes a bad movie and you don't know what to do. But I think that you have to stay true to yourself and your opinion and always be objective. I mean, they should appreciate that if you start being very, I don't know, political or doing PR with your writing, then at some point your writing will not have a point. So what I do is I write what I think about the movie, and I hope that they can understand. But if they don't, I cannot do anything about that. That's my approach.
I mean, notoriously there are very many major filmmakers who take any form of negative criticism very badly. But overall, I think great filmmakers or good filmmakers or kind of well-meant filmmakers really also appreciate any form of criticism or any kind of honest opinion. In a sense, making a film, of course, is so challenging, and filmmakers need to kind of live and breathe the film for so long that I think if the position is expressed well, if without there's in my view there's no danger in offending a filmmaker if you approach the film with the right respect, or with all the filmmaker with the level of appreciation anyway of the effort put. And if perhaps the film was below your expectation, you may also wish to tell that or write about that. And as I said, I personally, of course, I know that several filmmakers take also criticism in a kind of more negative way, in good stride, in a sense, also as a kind of but it really depends. I understand the struggle and the dilemma. Yeah.
I just want to say that, first of all, you're not writing for the filmmaker to read. You're writing for other people to read, and you're also writing to express yourself and what you want to say. Obviously, it's easier said than done, because, like, you know, with the writing I've been doing with because I've written for what they call trade publications, they're very strict. So I'm not allowed to write about films by people who I'm friends with. Of course, there's a bit of a fine line, because, like, you know, it's just they bleed into each other. And I've actually had lots of people ask me this question and it always happens in Asia, that, you know, when I'm at a workshop, a writing workshop, it's always the Asians who've written for like 20 years and like longer than me, and they'll say to me, oh, I'm really worried about offending people. You know, and the only I can say is, if you're worried about offending people, then just don't do it. Don't write reviews. write interviews, write other things like, that say stuff like that Davide writes, stuff that sort of analyzes or provides information and knowledge about those films, but if you want to have your own voice, or you feel you want to have an opinion, then don't care about what anybody says, just write it.
Yep. Adrian, do you have anything to say to that? You look like you have thoughts.
Yeah, I just get, some memories flooded in. Of filmmakers engaging me in things like that.
Poisoning your nasi goreng.
but I very much agree to what Panos and Maggie say. In a sense, you're trying you should be loyal, or you should kind of keep the reader in mind first and foremost. I totally agree with that. In a sense, if as Maggie said, if you're overly concerned, or if you're thinking about the filmmaker or your relationship with the filmmaker, that's a very tricky place where to start, basically.
Yeah, I very much agree with what Maggie said. I mean, we are not writing for the filmmakers. I mean, we are writing for the audience and whoever wants to watch the film. So it's basically where your commitment should lies. Of course, when you have commitment to the public, you have an obligation, to write within a certain structure. For example, I mean, you don't badmouth the director or the filmmakers in person. I mean, you basically analyze the film. I mean, that kind of thing you should always keep in mind as a writer. And I think every film reviewer already knew this. Other than that, you just have to fight through this culture of decency. I don't know. I mean, because in the past, usually we only have the filmmakers to worry about, but today, especially in this day and age, I think filmmakers are nothing to worry about. I mean, I'm more afraid of other people opinions of actually at the moment. I mean, like other netizens, or all those fanboys and fangirls and fan groups in social media where you basically cannot criticize a Bong Joon-ho film, for example, because they have this very strong fanboy in Indonesia. I mean, for me, they are more fearsome than the filmmakers. I mean, the filmmakers are just okay. They just one person, it's a group. So this faceless mass of people that you barely know about on the internet, they are far more fearsome. So, I mean, if you could handle that, filmmakers are nothing to worry about.
I'm picking up words like fearsome, like commitment, and all these really like scary words. And I'm wondering, there seems to be like expectation. I mean, like even memories flooding back to you. And Adrian, you had that phase where you're just not here anymore, right? Like you're having all these flashbacks. Yeah, because I'm wondering, how can trust be built such that you people trust that you're coming from a good place, and therefore there is not much uncertainty or hesitation when you just want to be, like what Panos said, like state very clearly and respectfully about what you really think. And this also brings to another question from the audience. And I think because of time, like this will be our last question. So this is Rebecca from Singapore, right? So she's asking this from the perspective of an educator. As a curious child in Singapore, I didn't feel that I had a nurturing space to give my opinions on art or frameworks on how to think critically about what I was viewing and reading. Is this changing now in Southeast Asia? And what does fostering a culture of film criticism for the younger generation look like in Southeast Asia? How important is it for governments to be involved? And what are some ways to achieve this without government support?
Well, since you mentioned South Asia, maybe Adrian also.
Whoa, that's a big question. I mean, I don't even know how to answer it. I mean, in Indonesia, it's one of the issue that has been also that we have been struggling also. I mean, when we talk about film literacy, for example, within the national regulation, the World Film Literacy, it's actually written in the censorship law, in the film censorship law. So by regulation, film literacy is actually the duty of the board of censorship in Indonesia by regulation, by law. And that was actually very concerning, of course. I mean, how do you put literacy and censorship in the same sentence? That's just so. Because of that situation, because of that background, I always believe that if we want to build a culture of criticism, of a culture of literacy, not just film but literacy in general, we should do it from the people to the people. I mean, we should just skip the state entirely, because when we involve state or government or that kind of power, that kind of centralized power, they usually just interpret literacy as one way of reading things, or one way of making meanings out of things, or out of art. So what we actually need to create, especially now, is actually solidarity between people, not just film writers, but also with filmmakers also, and also with like theater owners also. I mean, we need to create this network, of, I don't know how to call it, but network of solidarity, that okay, let's create something. I mean, from the filmmakers, they have a bunch of knowledge that could be shared about how they make films, how they craft images, how they craft stories. I mean, we could produce that, or interpret that into a text perhaps, or podcast or whatever, and use it for the public learning. I mean, it's that kind of what some people call left wing method of doing things that should be the future. Actually, I mean, because I don't know. I mean, we could not involve the state for literacy. I mean, it's just too risky for me. In Indonesia, I don't know in other Southeast Asian countries, but I think we share the same social troubles.
Social problems is one way to put it.
I would like to ask you something, Adrian. So is there in Indonesia, there is censorship in film writing? Like if you are in a big publication, you can find your text censored by the government, your writing?
Oh, not for the media publication, but for the film, yeah, for the film screen.
Okay.
But you're basically allowed to write anything as long as it doesn't, defame the president or put bad words about the government. So you basically allowed to write it.
Okay.
I think for festivals, like also Adrian was saying, I really believe that now, of course, is a very complicated thing. Unfortunately, it's very quite tragic and a complex period. And let's see, of course, when things will improve worldwide, because unfortunately we are living in multiple kind of wars at the moment. The in-person, which obviously I'm saying this in total awareness of the current situation, I really believe the in-person kind of exchange, festivals, film clubs, and kind of group meetings and discussions do foster and can have much more potential in a sense than much more centralized or kind of from the top down approaches. So fostering that and finding ways, and potentially finding ways in a sense to connect. Nowadays, obviously, with the internet, is much more easy to be aware or become aware of certain events happening or certain initiatives, etc. So trying to kind of follow that and trying to engage on that level, I think could definitely be a positive way forward and a good way to enter into a kind of a more virtuous circle around Southeast Asia, but also not only, of course, for film literacy discussion and kind of awareness and hopefully development of the overall situation.
I seem to notice that like film studies is not common in the curriculum of schools, like the younger schools in Asia as much as in other countries. Is it true? I mean, I guess that's one way to start too, is to to see it as, like, in schools, I guess kids learn art, so they learn history, so why can't they learn film earlier as well? I mean, is that happening in Southeast Asia? I wouldn't know, so I'd be interested to know.
I'm not sure about the other countries, but last time I checked, in Indonesia, there were like 20% around 20-ish film schools, or at least college with film courses, and it's actually very, very small in numbers. So,
But for a lower, like a younger education, like high school or primary school, is there any? Is it
Nah.
part of the? Okay, right. So that's one thing that's worth pushing, isn't it? To make it to make some form of film studies part of the school program. And I'm sure kids would love it. I mean, just imagine being able to just sit together and watch movies and talk about it and train the way they, like, not train, but stimulate the way they express themselves and they react to so many things in a movie. I mean, like, there's music, there's art, there's storytelling, drama, history, everything, you know, like, why not?
Yeah, I think this is where I can make a small plug for the Youth Jury and Critics program that SGIFF is doing. Because in Singapore as well, like, there is no such thing as film education in the like younger, you know, like the most maybe at like the diploma or the college degree level. But the Youth Jury and Critics program, like, it's a nice entry point where you can just like learn more, even meet other people who cares about films. Yeah. And also, yeah, because I think there's this one more question that I think I'm going to just combine with my own little personal question, right? So like, we have a question from Rohana from Indonesia. Like, great to hear these talks on how Asian cinema risen. And I want to hear from the panelists about Singapore cinema in particular, and how do you see them growing, and what's the history behind it? And my little addition is, what actually are your dreams for cinema and criticism? That's a big ass question, but you know.
Well, I think okay, Singapore. I think it's I don't know if I can say exactly it's on the rise, but there are some number of very interesting voices. Okay, you have like veterans like Eric Koo, who is like internationally acclaimed, and you have I forget his name, who did the Wet Season.
Chris Yeo?
Anthony Chen?
Anthony Chen?
Anthony Chen, yes. So you have some interesting voices in Singapore, and okay, as far as I can see, because Singapore is, okay, I don't want to tell you about your country, you know it better than me, but as far as I know, this strictness in laws that you have, and the fact that it's the most expensive country in the world at the moment, I think, statistically, I think Singapore is the most expensive, can give rise to a lot of ideas about film. I think these kind of circumstances are good for creativity. So I expect a lot of good things in the future from Singapore cinema. And also, not exactly to answer this question, but I wanted to say something to all the previous questions, because when you check the box offices of South and Southeast Asian countries, again, in the top, you mostly see Hollywood films and superheroes and you know what. So the first thing to do is to start watching South and Asian movies in general, and then the rest will come. The writing will come, the reviews will come, the teaching of Asian movies in schools will come. But first, the audience needs to start watching their own country's cinema. Then the rest will come. This is my sentiment. As a person from Greece who watches Asian cinema, okay, I understand the oxymoron of the whole thing, but this is my opinion.
Well, anyone else have any thoughts, sentiments, memories?
Singapore. The truth is, I don't watch much Singaporean cinema. That's also the same thing actually applies to many other neighboring Southeast Asian countries, and it actually reflects on one of these underlying very big problem within our region, that we actually don't know each other. A few months ago, a friend of mine, Lisa Bonarahman and Meiske Taurisia, Edwin's producer, they actually organized this online screening platform with the Japan Foundation, and I forgot with who, but they screen Indonesian films and Thailand films. I forgot which, and one Filipino films. And one night, Lisa actually phoned me and said that, could you help me, to write something about this? Because the thing is, we actually shared a very similar historical problems. We have dictators, we have colonialism, but we barely know each other. Actually, we do. I mean, for example, when Lisa screened these Indonesian films, Lisa wanted to explain about how we in Indonesia we had these 30 years of Suharto's dictatorship. I mean, in other area we know, like for example, like Civil War in America, it's basically like a shared history now. It's basically like basic facts that most people in the world know. But when we talk about the 32 years of Suharto's dictatorship, even our neighbors don't know about it. We struggle, to understand about it. And the same thing, we struggle to understand how the people in Thailand, for example, how their social and historical problems, or the people in Singapore. So at this point, I mean, and this actually links up to what my dream is about. I really wanted, to imagine a future where film writings or products of film criticism in general, not just reviews, that it could link our understanding regarding each other, because and it could pave the way for a new kind of history, because I always believe when you within films like for me, like they are these little portraits of society, and in it and usually they are the most responsive way to process history, to record history, short films, documentaries, fictions. And whenever we write about those, the more we write about those films, especially all those grassroots and underground ones, and those that are not, those that are restricted by the censorship board, those forbidden films, we will get, a new side of history that we barely talk about previously. So my vision or my hope for the future is that.
If I may say something that may not, I don't know how people are going to take it, but just from my personal experience, I've been asked to read a lot of scripts for various workshops and whatever from Southeast Asia. And what I've noticed is that with the Singaporean scripts, and I think sometimes if you look at the script, if it's written by the director, then you actually see a lot of the original. I mean, you see more of what the director wants to say than say the finished product, because you go through a lot of problems and different production conditions, so it's not always what it was like in the beginning. But looking at the scripts, I think Singapore directors are very good at structure. They're logical and they're very articulate. So what they wanted to visualize, they actually present it very well in the script. But if you look at script by other Southeast Asian countries, like Philippines or Indonesia or Malaysia, they're not as well structured, but then they're much more crazy. They're not scared of putting in all kinds of crazy ideas, or they're not scared of being very brave and criticizing the government, or talking about corruption or whatever, like even though they're probably under a lot of pressure in their daily lives. But they're like, I think there's a sense of like, oh, so what if I fail? I'm just gonna do it. And they rush it out. I mean, their ideas, they just pour it out. And it might need a lot more structure. It might need more fixing in a way, but then they have that energy. Whereas with Singaporean films, I don't want to stereotype it. They're
Just
more
say
careful.
Say it straight, Maggie.
They're almost too careful and too afraid to fail. And so in the end, the stories are good, but they usually tend to be less adventurous. Like it's always more of a smaller story with less ambition, which is not always a bad thing. I mean, you look at, Anthony Chen talking about his childhood, but it's still like, he could take it to a much higher level than the story itself. But in terms of the scripts I've read by a lot of Singaporean directors, this is the thing, is that they should dream bigger and be less afraid to fail.
Have more guts.
Mm.
Yeah. Davida, there anything to say? Or because we are like 17 minutes past time.
Okay.
Have any? I mean, like to even wrap up, right? Because
Yeah.
among us, like in our part, like our current audience members, like there are also people who are aspiring film lovers, film responders, film critics, whatever you want to call it. People with things to say about film, right? Like, what would you? It's really cheesy, but I want to hear it. Like, what is one thing that you might want to tell them?
Watch Asian movies. That's it.
Watch Asian movies.
Yeah, watch Asian movies.
If we are talking about a cheesy suggestion, but especially in these days, I think there's a new meaning to the sentence. I would say, see you at the cinema.
Oh.
Oh.
Memories.
I think Xiaoting mentioned something that we sort of hadn't had a chance to explore, but I think it's a really great thing to mention. She talked about trust, and she was talking about the trust between the writer and the reader or whoever they're working with. But I would also say just trust yourself. You know, don't be afraid, whether you're a filmmaker or whether you're a writer.
Oh. Come on, Adrian. Oh.
It's a heartwarming note to end with.
Oh, I'm gonna get scouted by Disney now.
Oh, Adrian, wrap it up, Adrian.
No. I'll just say something provocative note. Not me.
What? Come on, leave with a bang.
Don't trust the government.
All right, trust yourself. Okay,
Trust yourself.
not the-
That's the best way to finish, I think.
Oh well. Yeah. Okay,
Now
well,
we run.
thank
Now
you
we run.
everyone. Thank you everyone for like joining us on like a Saturday
Thanks.
afternoon. And also like before we end off, I think like we just want to make a plug that if anyone wants to watch the replays or stay updated with what's going on with the Singapore International Film Festival, like you can find them on Instagram or Facebook, right? So the Facebook is just simply Singapore International Film Festival. And for the Instagram is SGIFFEST. Yeah. Have a good rest of the day and thanks for being with us.
Thanks for the
Bye-bye.
invite and thank you. Take
you.
care, you all.
It was
Take care.
great fun to be
Thank
with
you.
you guys.
Yeah, I think the panel.